Welcome to the Rotary Club Milwaukee. I am President Darren Miller, President of JM Construction. As we gather virtually today, our 16th virtual meeting in our 108-year history, we will continue the tradition of reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, Ann Wall, shareholder with Von Briesen and Roper, will give our invocation.
Bless this gathering of fellow Rotarians today. Please help us to see those in need and give us the strength and wisdom to serve our community as we should. Help us to lift the burdens of others while we maintain the dignity of humankind. Soften our hearts to be sensitive and loving as we serve together as Rotarians. Amen.
Thank you, Ann. Now for a bit of club business. want to say thank you to the 150 plus members of the club who filled out our survey on returning to in-person events last week. 1/3 of our members expressed a willingness to return to Memorial Hall soon. And this is down from 42% when we last surveyed our membership in June. We are carefully considering our options. I too look forward to seeing my Rotary friends in Memorial Hall. However, the recent rise in cases is concerning. As of this week, Wisconsin's infection rate is comparable to the experience of New York and Boston just before they closed down in late March. Wisconsin is certainly not out of the woods, and we are monitoring the situation on an ongoing basis, and we'll keep you updated. We will also send out another email survey next week, and your opinions are very important to us. Next, the Coffee Connector Group will meet virtually this Thursday morning at 7:30 a.m. See the link in this morning's email or contact the Rotary office for the link. Our Thursday snack program will also be back this week with Rotarian Lilith Fowler. She is the Executive Director of the Harbor District, and she'll give us an overview of the work that's going on there. Be sure to join us live at noon on Zoom, or if you can't make it, check out the program on our YouTube channel, which will be uploaded by Thursday afternoon. Now, Kent Laverne, Chief Deputy District Attorney for the county, Milwaukee County, will begin our program with Sheriff Earnell Lucas.
Thank you, President Darren, and good afternoon to all of you. Sheriff Earnell Lucas is the 65th Sheriff of Milwaukee County, elected on November 6, 2018, with the goal of restoring honor, integrity, and trust in the Sheriff's Office, for treating everyone with dignity and respect. He commands a staff that is responsible for safety and security at Milwaukee Mitchell International Airport, the Milwaukee County Circuit Courts, the Milwaukee County Jail, and the Milwaukee County Parks and Freeway System. Sheriff Lucas was born in Milwaukee's Hillside Terrace housing project, and upon the death of his mother, was raised by his grandmother. He attended Milwaukee Public Schools and has a bachelor's degree cum laude in criminology and law studies from Marquette University. Before becoming sheriff, he served as Major League Baseball's chief liaison of security and investigations, and his 17-year career took him to all parts of the world overseeing security operations, conducting sensitive investigations, and safeguarding the integrity of the game of baseball at the major and minor league levels. Sheriff Lucas chose a career in law enforcement at an early age after an encounter with a police officer, which showed him the awesome authority that officers hold. In a career spanning over 25 years at MPD, he served as the department's public information officer and as a district commander. He retired at the rank of captain. Sheriff Lucas still bears the scars of sustaining a shotgun blast to the right side of his face as a young officer. Sheriff Lucas and his wife reside in Milwaukee and attend St. Matthew's CME Church, where he has been an active member for over 50 years. Sheriff, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Kent, and let me thank the Milwaukee Rotary for inviting me out today. On a point of personal privilege, as President Miller was describing the coffee clutch in the morning and the Thursday lunches in the afternoon, I wonder why did I get so shortchanged that all I get is a Zoom conference, but I'm certainly glad to be here.
We're happy to have you here. So let's just jump in. We alluded to it in your introduction that you had an encounter as a young man that led you to become a law enforcement officer yourself. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I talk about it a lot, Kent. I, as a young boy, was very impressionable. As you indicated, I was born in the Hillside Housing Project. My family moved to the near west side shortly after my birth. Then in 1967, our family relocated to what is now known as the Harambe neighborhood because of the proposed Park West Freeway, as well as the disturbances of 1967. I lost my mom in 1969, a grandmother who was a domestic in a small town outside of Jasper, Alabama, outside of Birmingham, Alabama, Jasper, came to Milwaukee to raise 3 boys, me being the youngest. On a summer afternoon, I couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. I was walking from the corner of 2nd and Burleigh to a store on 1st and Burleigh when a police officer pulled alongside of me. Never got out of his squad car. Rolled down his window, he said, "Hey kid, you stole a woman's purse." I said, no, sir, I didn't. He said, yes, you did. I said, sir, I got a note and $20. I'm going to this store here on the corner. And he said, well, I'm going to run you over and have this woman identify you. And I said, sir, you can do that. But if she doesn't identify me, you're going to run me back over here to this store because grandma's going to be pretty upset if I don't get these groceries home. In that moment, that officer sped away. But it was in that moment I knew what I wanted to do with my life. When you think about the awesome authority that a law enforcement officer has, they can make the determination whether a person is taken into custody or whether a person goes free. They make the decision whether a person lives or in those unfortunate instances where a person's life is taken. And so I knew I wanted to do this for my community. I continued on. I graduated from high school, Rufus King High School, 1976. 1976, I took the exam for the police department and scored #1 on the exam, and decided to enter into the police department. And on my very first week on the job at the police department, I walked into the 5th District Station on 4th and Locust, and who do you think I encountered? It was that very same police officer that I encountered as a young man. And I walked up to him and asked him that proverbial question that none of us like to be asked, do you remember me? And he was taken aback for a moment, but I told him, I said, no, sir, it's because of you that I chose to enter into this profession. When you think about the encounters that young men and women of color have today versus the encounter that I described, what's different? Well, one, it has to be the trust that law enforcement had in the communities that they served, as well as the community having trust in its law enforcement officers. We knew all of the police officers in the neighborhood by name. Many of them came onto the playground at what is now Clinton Roads and was then Garfield Park and played ball with all of us young boys. And so there was more of a trust and a feeling, a sense of community. That officer is white and German. I'm African-American and Black, but we both have this desire to want to serve and protect our community. He and his brother, who was also on the police department, and I are still friends to this day. And I told him everywhere I go, I tell this story because it had such a profound impact on me as a young man and still resonates with me and with others today. And I tell that story because it had such a profound impact on my career.
How did that incident impact the way you acted as a police officer yourself?
Well, I saw the high level at which law enforcement officers can interact with the public that it served. It was officers like him and many others that I had the fortune of having contacted me at an early age that taught me the right things, how to do the right things and how to do them the right way. And it was because of that, it's guided me all throughout my entire career, now spanning over 4 decades. I was fortunate in that many who took a liking to this young boy told me lessons that I didn't have to go and learn the hard way. Gave me examples of their experiences of things that went right, as well as those things that went wrong. And more importantly, continue to be a shoulder for me to lean on as I began going up the ranks and into the command of the police department. The foundation of a young officer is so critical these days. It's the culture that is so important in policing. We talk a lot about policies and procedures in law enforcement, but it's the culture that means everything. As Peter Drucker once said, that culture eats policy for breakfast. And so if we don't have a culture that fosters the growth and development of our young officers, young deputies, our young men and women, then we can have all of the policies. But what happens when that policy falls down? What remains is the culture. We've got to continue to grow and work on the culture in law enforcement today.
And I want to talk about that here in a few minutes, more specifically in light of the recent events here in our nation and locally. I want to get a couple other background questions asked of you first. You rose to the rank of captain at MPD. You commanded a police district over at District 3, I believe. And before that, you nearly lost your life in the line of duty. We're going to talk about that for just a minute.
It's something I talk about very ever so often, but on a New Year's Day in 1982, we responded to one of the more routine calls in law enforcement, and that is a disturbance call, and it was a domestic call. It was a gentleman in the lower unit. He was out on New Year's, maybe with some other friends, and he left his lady friend at home. And upon his return, he had imbibed throughout the night, came home and was creating a disturbance, and she called the police. I don't know if maybe in an attempt to embarrass him, but we arrived and we began having a dialogue between the door with the individual. And making the story short, we lost contact with the individual after we heard him collapse and fall. And fearing for his well-being and his safety, we asked the manager to come and open the door. And when the manager opened the door, the individual was seated in the floor, barricaded with a 12-gauge shotgun pointed at the door. We were outside the apartment, and so we had cover. And then we even took up another position of cover outside the common hallway of the unit, and asked the woman caller to go back up to her apartment. But in the course of this stalemate, if you will, the woman began to descend the flight of stairs. And at a point, if she had crossed the threshold of that door and a distance of about 7 to 10 feet, a shotgun blast would have certainly been a very serious, if not fatal, injury for her. And it was in that moment that I gave up my position and barely got the words "lady" out my mouth before he fired once, and it struck me in the right side of my temple. I fell to the ground. It was a foot of snow on the ground. It was one of the coldest days on record. And when I reached my hand up, the adrenaline started flowing and blood started flowing, and was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital. And I'm fortunate that I was able to survive my injuries. I have to put it into context for those on the call here. It was in one of the more difficult periods in the history of the Milwaukee Police Department. On December 23rd, 1981, you had two Milwaukee police officers drive along King Drive at about Lloyd, see an individual run from a tavern into an alley. He doubles back. One officer comes to the alley. He shoots and fires at that officer, grabs his gun. And then when the other officer came into the alley, he shoots that officer with his partner's gun. New Year's Day, 1982, I was shot on 10th and Walnut. And then on January 30th, 1982, a police officer was serving a non-felony warrant at a pool hall on Hopkins and Burleigh when an individual pulled out a 25 caliber weapon, struck him in his collarbone. And in the period of 40 days, you had 4 Milwaukee police officers shot, and I'm the lone survivor of that difficult period in the history of the Milwaukee Police Department. So I feel it as if I have a calling on my life to continue not only for those 3 friends and brothers and colleagues, but to go on and do that with the opportunity that was given me.
Well, you certainly had a number of opportunities that you completed successfully at MPD, retired as a captain, and you went on to a 17-year career with Major League Baseball, which could be a lecture in and of itself, I know, but after 17 years of that job, literally traveling the nation and the world, Earnell, what made you decide to come back and seek the role of Milwaukee County Sheriff?
Well, truth be told, or we just want the story here. Truth be told, I was in New York. I was in the New York office of baseball when I received a call from a good friend of mine named Kent Laverne. I don't know if any of you know him, But he called me and said, "Hey, Earnell, some people have been having conversation around town here, and your name has come up quite often." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, people were wondering if you would consider running for sheriff." I said, "Ken, are you kidding? I'd have to be out of my mind. I got a job. I travel all over the country, watch young men play a game, get paid very well to do it. And why would I want to give that up?" But Ken said, "Well, would you think about it? Would you consider it?" And I told my friend Kent, I'll do you this. I'm not returning to Milwaukee until February for a Super Bowl. I was going to spend Super Bowl Sunday here in Milwaukee with my family. And I told him I'd come and meet with him. And so on a Saturday, I met with Kent and a few others, and we began a discussion about my coming and running against the incumbent sheriff at the time, who had been repeatedly reelected, but had started losing his way. And so after the meeting on Sunday, I flew back to New York on Monday. And on Monday, I received a call from one of those in the meeting and said, "Earnell, we're ready to go with this. When can we go live with your running for sheriff?" And I said, "Well, wait a minute." And long before we get to that, I've got to have conversations with the commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig, as well as have to have conversations with many others before we can begin that discussion. But it was the continual communication of good people in this community, like Kent Laverne, like my late friend and former talk show host, Eric Vaughn, and others, that said, "Earnell, you have the right experience, judgment, and leadership that can steer the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office back on a course to the high standards that it once proudly held." And so it was that began this journey, and I'm so humbled and grateful that you and others saw enough in me to elect me the 65th sheriff on November 6th of 2018.
So you've been in the job now for 18 months or so, and how would you evaluate the progress, the status of your agency at this point in time?
Well, I still conclude that you folks had to be out of your mind to ask me to come back and do this job, but I know I'm here for a purpose and for a reason. I have no regrets about my decision. In fact, I'm more encouraged and motivated each day. And if you had told me that we would encounter a pandemic, and if you had told me that we would see disturbances breaking out all across the country, including right here in our own community, no way would I have signed up for that. But what I have been able to do, what we've been able to do for the past 18 months is nothing short of a miracle. To re-engineer the sheriff's office into an agency that cooperates and functions with all the other offices of county government, all the other law enforcement agencies in southeastern Wisconsin, as well as on a state and national level. And then to work directly with the community, engaging the community in what is it that they want from their sheriff's office, and to look back at many of the results. And we haven't had time to even raise our heads up to look back at what all we've accomplished. But we know we've done some positive things. We've had some positive impacts. And so I'm encouraged. I brought with me a staff. I selected 3 women in late November to come with me to lead this organization, not because they were women, but because they were successful and accomplished individuals in their own right. Chief Deputy Danita Ball, who oversees the day-to-day operations of the Sheriff's Office, has her PhD, worked 25 years in the police department, has taught at many institutions here in the Milwaukee area. Attorney Molly Zillick, who is an accomplished lawyer, worked in the Corporation Council here in Milwaukee County, had done a lot of work in the county, particularly representing the sheriff's office. I had no personal contact with her whatsoever, knowledge of her, but because of a search that I was doing and then some research that I was doing, her name came to me and I selected her. And then Faith Colas, who has worked in the community here for a number of years in print, electronic, and radio. Her late husband, again, Eric Vaughn, was someone that truly left a mark in this community. So we assembled a team, added to it a bright young man, energetic, very thoughtful, and Ted Chisholm. And we've just put our heads down and going about doing 3 things. 1, restoring the honor, integrity, and trust back to the sheriff's office. 2, treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless to if they've committed a crime, what crime they committed, or what their socioeconomic status or immigrant status or anything is. And then 3, deliver the high level of service that the residents and people of Milwaukee County truly deserve. And quite frankly, Kent, I'm very pleased to say that I think we've done well on all 3, but our work still continues.
Well, let's talk about some of the recent events that you just alluded to. What was your reaction when you watched the video of the murder of George Floyd?
To me, one of the more reprehensible acts, and it shows the depth of man's inhumanity to man, to watch 4 former Minneapolis police officers take the life of one Mr. George Floyd. We've seen a number of instances around the country of mistreatment and abuse of power by law enforcement, but nothing ever shook the conscience as watching an individual place his knee on the neck of a human being, as the way the former Minneapolis police officer did for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So it was troubling, it was reviling, and it was dealt with very swiftly and very appropriately by Chief Arredondo in Minneapolis with the dismissal of the 4 officers the following day, and then the subsequent charges by the prosecutor's office. I think that was the appropriate thing. And now we need for justice to be served for the family of Mr. George Floyd. And I'm placing my faith and trust in the criminal justice system that it will do just that.
We've obviously seen since that incident an outpouring of public demonstrations. What messages are you hearing from the demonstrations that are taking place here in Milwaukee and across the nation?
That there's a systemic problem still in this country with the issue of race and racism and of sexism and of isms of every type. And I think the young people that I've interacted with over the course of the last 45 days or so is one that we're tired. We're fed up. We want some change. And I said early on that you have my attention. I hear you loud and clear. Now let's begin the substantive discussion and dialogue. Do we always get it right in law enforcement? Absolutely not. We are not perfect people, but we're proud professionals. And many of us place our badge over our heart and go out each day to do our level best. But sometimes we fall short. And our hope is in the system that when law enforcement officers fall short, that leaders, sheriffs, and police chiefs all across the country step in and step up and do the right thing in those instances. And we hope now that the community at large, the business community, the faith-based community, the political bodies at the local, state, and federal level are now starting to listen very attentively to the demands and the calls of people. And let's get in the room and let's start having some substantive dialogue on the changes that they're proposing. And I, for one, am ready to sit down at the table. I've said to those around the Milwaukee area and in the state, the old saying that if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. We cannot begin this conversation and dialogue without law enforcement at the table. So when we're ready to have these discussions, count me in. I'm ready to have that dialogue.
And how do you see this unfolding? These discussions that need to take place. You alluded to larger systems in the community, even beyond police departments, and that need to be part of this conversation. How do you envision that taking place?
I've been, taught well by my former boss, Mr. Seelig at baseball, that you can get a lot of things done in the back of the room. I made it a point that I wasn't going to impugn or to have disputes and dialogues in the public space because people are watching. Our children and our children's children are watching. And I don't think that's an appropriate way to have discourse and dialogue in our community. And so what I've been doing is working the periphery. I've reached out to several institutions and people in this community and asked them, would they place their confidence and trust in me in using my platform to begin a discussion and a conversation and a dialogue. I'm confident that we can and will move forward. I see a lot of room for some in the community to step up. Some use opportunities like this to further their own political gains and futures. I'm not about that. I've had that career opportunity. I've had a wonderful opportunity, gave it all up to come back here because that young boy was born in the Hillside Housing Project, wanted to get out and do something with what time he has left on this earth for this community. And so it's going to take people who are committed to the cause of making substantive change in our community. And I'm not just talking about little incremental changes. I'm not talking about, an appointment here or a program there or some monies appropriated here. We need to look at the systemic changes, issues in our community along race, along gender, along ethnicity, and other problems, socioeconomic, healthcare, education, and others. And when and if we do, and only then, can we begin moving the needle forward and making some changes in our community.
So you're a public safety official, law enforcement executive, and you talked, you're talking about things that are socioeconomic and even bigger. What's the impact from your standpoint, or the relationship between those two? Why, in your mind, does it need to be a bigger discussion than just the policing, which is in and of itself an important issue?
Well, again, I learned at baseball, and even going back to my days in the police department as the public information officer, when I would go with the police chief, and in fact escorted two of them to meetings with the Milwaukee Rotary, and I vowed to myself one day that the next time I go to a Rotary, I'm going to be the person on the agenda, not someone else. So I've somewhat accomplished that. It's not in person, but I'll take this to me. But I learned the interrelatedness of all things. Dr. King once said that we're all caught in this inescapable network of mutuality, tied by a single garment of destiny, and that what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. So for me, all of us and everything is interrelated. Business, the business engine, the economic engine can't roar in southeastern Wisconsin and in Milwaukee if we don't have safety. The political bodies can't move any agenda forward, bring any business, any attractions here without having a safe environment, as well as our cultural attractions, all of our jewels, our lakefront, our parks, our roads, our freeways. If we don't have safety, we don't have anything. So fully understanding the connectedness, the relationship between government and business and faith-based institutions and cultural attractions and the community at large, understanding that connectedness, that relation, it helps me understand better what it is that we need to go out and do on each day in order to make Milwaukee County strong and make Milwaukee County safe.
So at the same time, I think you referred to the fact that certainly police cultures need to be examined and changed. And I guess I wonder if you can compare or contrast what you've seen over your lifetime in terms of the culture of police and the relationship with community, and what's changed for the better or for the worse. And as you use the term police culture and the need for a changing culture, or the importance of strong culture within policing agencies, what are you talking about, and what needs to happen moving forward?
Well, some very basic things. Again, understanding a distinction, though, let me make for our listeners, but to understand a sheriff's responsibility is founded in the Constitution. And here in Milwaukee County, the sheriff has 5 core functions. First being the airport, second being the halls of justice, our courthouse, third being our freeways, Fourth being our jail, which is our largest area and our biggest liability. And then finally, our 150 plus parks. While the police responds to calls for service, 911 calls for service in their respective municipalities, there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies around the country, and they're there for a reason. And that is because people all across this country have said, we want police in our community for these reasons, whatever those reasons are. Here in Milwaukee, if we're going to do anything to one, change the culture, and two, advance the policing here in Milwaukee County, we need to have some substantive conversations and dialogue. I, for one, believe that, again, it starts with what's in a man's or a woman's heart. I know for a fact that I can't change a man or a woman's heart, much as I try, or much as I try to impress upon by telling my stories and sharing my experiences. But what I can ensure for the people of Milwaukee County is that for that 8, 10, or 12 hours, they're under the employ of the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, that they are going to conduct and comport themselves to the high standard of this organization and to the mores and values of this community. And if not, there's going to be swift judgment and decision, and it's going to be very public so that others don't come along. So we've got to, again, start very basic with the introduction during the recruitment process. So important these days. What type of individual are we recruiting? Two, is very important in the training process. We have over 5.5, almost 6 months with a recruit to teach him or her all of the work that goes on in a law enforcement agency. And then third, it's important for us to monitor them throughout the course of their career. Two things will always land law enforcement in a courtroom, and that is our failure to train and our failure to supervise. Take any issue, and somewhere along the way, it was an issue because of law enforcement's failure to train that individual or failure to supervise that individual. And so if we don't have enlightened sheriffs and police chiefs, if we don't have enlightened leaders throughout the organization, and if we're not imparting that experience and culture that all of us have had, then again, all of the policies that we have won't stack up to having indoctrinated individuals, young people into our family. So that's where our work begins. We've done a number of things at our Milwaukee County Training Academy, and certainly with the enlightened leadership that we have here at the Sheriff's Office. Again, we're not perfect people, but believe me, we're proud professionals, and we're doing everything we can to serve the people here in Milwaukee County.
Well, I'm curious, as you talk about training, what kind of training police agencies, not just yours, but others that you may be aware of, undertake with regard to communication with young people, communication with teenagers, understanding teenagers, or people in their early 20s, because so many of the incidents that turn into deadly situations often involve younger people and police officers. So I'm curious about that point. What type of training is emerging or already is underway with regard to that? And then I'm also interested in what type of training do you undertake with regard to implicit bias and some of those other related issues in terms of your or other officers' engagement with members of the community?
Well, let me say that, as far as young people, one of the missions that I have is to engage young people at a level. I said coming to this office that I would be in a school or a religious institution or in some type of community-based organization at least one a week. And in some weeks prior to the COVID, it was even 2 and sometimes 3 or more. And that was because, again, I know what it was like growing up as a young person and not having a mother and father, but a grandmother in my home who taught me the golden rule: treat everyone with the golden rule, and understand that there's consequences for your actions. So despite not having a mother and father in the home, I still was able to overcome navigate the difficulties and dangers of being a young person in our society. It's important for us, and we do it on a daily basis. I was just on a call last week with the Milwaukee Fellows, hosted by some of by Attorney John Daniels and Corey Nettles and others, where they take young men and give them experiences that they just don't get in other places and inspire those young men, and then introduce them to people like myself and like many of you on this call. And that's where, again, that's where we can have an impact. And then we're out, I was with a group, also the Milwaukee Lynx. I had a group of about 20 young people on a call. And we talked about, particularly as a man of color, that we communicate in ways that other cultures don't understand. We talk with our hands, as I've probably done a little bit throughout this call. Some of us like to talk with our neck or with our bodies in ways. And to a police officer, to a law enforcement officer, some of that can be threatening, if not intimidating. And so we've got to learn to understand those cultural communications, is how important it is for us. Biases, again, every one of us have some type of bias, whether it's, I don't like hot dogs with ketchup on them. It's strictly mustard on it for me. That's a bias. But we all have biases, and we've just got to learn to be able to confront and address those biases. So we have, as part of the training here in the state of Wisconsin, over 800 hours of training of various things, from safe operation of our vehicles to weapons qualification to cultural biases. And we add so many components to it. And in fact, including even a segment taught by the Singh community after the horrific shooting at the Sikh temple. We brought Pardeep in to address our deputies about the cultural differences of the Sikh community versus us here in America. And it is so enriching, and it's experiences like that that make us a better organization. So we're open to, willing to, and having that training ongoing. The community is crying for more, the culture is crying for more. But like with everything in life, training comes at a cost. And so we've got to be very mindful when we say we want it, but then how do we get it if we don't put our money where our mouth is?
You know, as you mentioned cost, there's actually a call among some in the community to defund police or to reduce the budgets that fund police departments. And I'm wondering what your opinion is about that.
It's a fair conversation. Again, I see police responding to a number of things that over the years I've seen added to our plate. When you think about our responding to mental health crises, when you see law enforcement responding to people with addictive behaviors and overdoses, or when you see police responding into schools for delinquent behavior, those are all things that we're not taught and trained and best prepared to address. But when we have a collapse of the social fabric here in our country, when the healthcare system collapsed and the education system collapsed and the jobs and economy collapsed, and now we have people homeless, all of that falls down on the law enforcement profession. And despite our best efforts and despite our good intentions and our goodwill, those are many things that we're not the best suited for to respond to. And then even on the lower end, those calls for disturbances, loud noise complaints, barking dog complaints, abandoned vehicles, those are all things that we've thrusted onto law enforcement to address. While we could be out doing other things, we could be doing some of the problem solving, addressing some of the critical issues in our community. But because we're dealing with things on the high end and the low end, we find ourselves just the dog chasing our tail. So I'm supportive of the conversation. I'm supportive of the dialogue. I think we can improve. We must improve. But again, it's a serious conversation that requires everybody to be at the table, including law enforcement. And when and where that conversation is, I want to be at the table.
Along those lines, what would you envision as the resources that could be made available to respond to some of the examples you've given that police routinely respond to that may not be seen or perceived as a serious crime issue, but what would be some examples, do you think, of ways that other community resources could be brought to bear, if appropriately funded, for as a practical and more effective response to some of these issues, daily issues that occur in our city?
Well, just looking at, and it's unfortunate, here we are in Milwaukee County, and we're watching at the close of 2020, the close of the behavioral health division. So a response to mental health crises, and I think it's unfortunate, but out of it has come some ideas of rapid response teams comprised of clinicians and professionals who can go out and address issues when an individual has, again, a crisis, and those individuals can address those crises better than we can as law enforcement. Because again, oftentimes, and we just saw it recently here, where I believe it was in Sheboygan or Grafton, where as we move along the continuum, it goes from verbal commands to something that we all regret, and that's the use of deadly force. So maybe having professionals like that respond could be helpful. Same thing too with the addictive behaviors. Again, we're not going to arrest our way out of all of our problems here in society. And police response to drugs in our community has been through the arrest process. We've got to look at more creative ways and look at it as less as a crime problem, but more as a behavioral problem. And how can we address that addictive behavior before it gets too far, and certainly before the individual either causes some harm to him or herself or to someone else. And then even on the smaller end, we've seen in our parks and in our social centers, less and less programming and opportunities for young people to either interact with professionals like those on the call here, or to just have one-on-one dialogue with themselves or a peer counselor or something of that nature. Again, the more and more we tear away the social fabric, the more and more things collapse down onto law enforcement. And so when we have and begin a discussion and a dialogue about how do we change these things, again, let's look at what you got police on this end doing, what we have police on this end doing. Let's find out what we want to keep them doing right here. And then that's when we can start looking at how can we fund social programs, as well as how can we address the mental health crises, as well as some of the addictive behaviors, and look at our community from a holistic approach, as opposed to just simply a law enforcement approach.
See, yeah, Mary has emerged on our screen. I think Mary McCormick, I think she has some questions from our audience. Sure.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us here today. And I do have to tell you that our coffee meeting and our Thursday snack meeting are all on Zoom. We are 100% Zoom, but we sure would love to have you back and speak to us when we're back in Memorial Hall again. And you're always welcome to join any of our meetings. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
But yeah, we are a Zoom friendly organization these days. Here's a very specific question that it says from Tom Gale. You're doing a great job, Earnell, but speeding on our freeway is out of control. How can we get drivers to slow down to at least only 5 miles per hour over the speed limit? I drive the freeway every day, and traveling the posted limit, cars are constantly blowing me off. What do you think?
I thank Tom for that question. I think Tom has asked me that question before, and but I appreciate his support and his continued support. That was one of the things that when I came to the position, Mary, that I saw that we need to do something better on our freeways and our interstate. But because Milwaukee County is the only county in the state of Wisconsin where the state patrol does not patrol on our Milwaukee County freeway systems, something's wrong with that. Now, whether it's because of some agreement in Madison or some disconnect down here in Milwaukee, I don't know the answer to it. Well, in fact, I do. I'm welcoming the State Patrol to join us in the efforts of doing something about the reckless driving on our streets. I always talk about the three things: education, enforcement, and engineering. We certainly can do a lot with education, and I'm not just talking about in our schools, but I'm talking about educating our adults. Because when I look left and I look right, and I'm sure Tom does as well, I see adults creating this type of behavior just as much as our young people. It's some of our older, more mature people making some of these reckless decisions out here. So we got to be more advanced and creative with our education. Enforcement on the part of law enforcement, we're working with Milwaukee County Council and Alderman Mike Murphy, the Reckless Driving Reduction Initiative with the City of Milwaukee Police Department and the State Patrol and others. And we're doing all we can, covering all of the miles of freeways that we have here in Milwaukee County. But it's not enough, and I'll be the first one to admit that. And then finally, engineering. And I was just, seeing the report from Alderman Murphy and his task force of how I know it'd be inconvenient for a lot of us, but some narrowing of our roads and putting bump outs at our corners and doing some other things, engineering our streets with some of the monies and the proposal that Governor Evers has made. And hopefully we can get some help from our federal government here. But one area where I always speak of right now, Mary and Tom, and I think Tom has heard me say this, but I'll say it for this group, where we're not bringing pressure to bear, and that is on our automakers. Our automakers can make a car that can park itself. Our automakers are making cars that can drive themselves. If they can do that, then certainly they can make a car that knows that it is in a 35-mile-an-hour zone, and if it's going 55 miles an hour, it should have some type of governing system that can slow that vehicle down. If we have OnStar and other systems that can do that, then we ought to be pressuring the automakers to do something about it. In the 1960s, when we looked at and saw the problems with safety in our vehicles, and everybody started calling for more safety from the automakers, what did they do? They put safety belts in our vehicles. And now we've seen less, and now they even have airbags. So we've seen them respond to public pressure there. But where are they when we need them now most with regard to this reckless driving, or even the ability to recognize that the car that Mary is driving right now belongs to Earnell Lucas? And I don't know that Earnell has given her the authority to do that. Let's shut this car down. The technology is there. The ability is there. But where is the will? And we need everybody to bring pressure to bear on our automakers.
That's quite a thoughtful answer. You've given us a lot of information, I think, to help understand the different jurisdictions, what the sheriff's department does, what police departments do. And you must work with 16 different police departments throughout the county. What kind of a relationship do you have with the various police departments? And I suppose in particular, how are you getting along with our police chief in the city of Milwaukee?
Well, there's 19 municipalities in Milwaukee County.
All right.
And we meet on a regular basis, particularly during the COVID and during the disturbance, almost on a daily basis. But a number of those police chiefs are former members of the Milwaukee Police Department. So whether it's in the village of Whitefish Bay and also in West Allis and South Milwaukee and or Franklin and others are people that I have relationships with, I'm familiar with. One of the things that I took from my experience at baseball and have brought it to the sheriff's office here is that I wanted to have a conversation, a standing conversation with people that I felt I needed to have a relationship with, so that even when we have a discord, a breakdown, that the next conversation we have won't be the first conversation. So Police Chief Al Morales and I talk every morning at 8 a.m. And we talk from everything, sports to our children, to everything that's going on in the world. And then when we have to get down to it, we discuss issues. And the virtue of that, Mary, is so that even when we have disagreements and differences from our respective positions, it doesn't cause a breakdown in our communication. And Al and I get along great, as well as with the other 19 municipal chiefs. I think it's a lesson to be learned. I even, when I came to office, the former county executive obviously supported my opponent during the campaign. And but I didn't take that personal, and I did what again I was taught. And we met every 3 weeks on a Monday. We alternated the office, his office and my office, same time at 12:30. And what it did was help us work through some differences, and more importantly, focus in on what we had in common, and helped us move Milwaukee County forward. So that's my lessons for working with all of our partners in law enforcement, as well as our partners in government.
Well, terrific. Let me just see here from, there's a couple questions here. Okay, from Kaylin Haywood. Sheriff, you're doing an amazing job. You mentioned the 5 constitutional obligations that you have. However, many of the people you serve view your duties to be all things law enforcement related. So it is important to develop a culture that puts integrity first. Do you think that some of the best practices that you and your department have implemented can be used and shared with our law enforcement agencies to improve community relationships? And if so, what are a few of those best practices? There you go.
Well, the answer to it unequivocally is yes. You know, again, I think it's very simple, very basic. It's not anything that requires a lot of math and science, but just a philosophy of treating everyone humanely. And when I think about people entering our jail, we hire our correctional officers and ask them to be their best when most of the people that they encounter on a daily basis are at their worst. Yet we hold them to a high standard of treating that individual who's not even concerned about his or her own well-being to treat them with dignity and respect. So that's a very basic philosophy and very basic tenet. Again, whether it's our policing strategies, while we're not, again, involved in the day-to-day policing to the extent that local municipalities have that responsibility. But again, there's certain things that we and ways that we conduct and comport ourselves that could be lessons for our partners. When we drive through the central city of Milwaukee and pull over a vehicle with 4 or 5 occupants in it, and we don't ask all 4 or 5 occupants to get out in the car and sit on the curb, because we wouldn't do that in Whitefish Bay, or we wouldn't do that in Bayside, or we wouldn't do that in other communities. And so that's a very easy and a simple lesson for other municipalities to learn. But yet they're governed by police chiefs and municipalities that, again, I was elected to be the sheriff of Milwaukee County, not over all things. But those are very basic things. And then even our interaction with federal authorities. I said, you know, we were not going to separate families here, because I came from a broken situation, and I know to understand and the difficulties and the challenges and the barriers that some families have. All of us came here from someplace, but now there seems to be such a divide, a wedge in between treating immigrants in our community and our society with humanely, that we can't even, again, allow them to have access to education, access to employment and healthcare and other things. And so just those basic tenets and philosophies, I think, can be adapted by other law enforcement agencies. And I think we can then start seeing some improvement in police community relationships.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. I'm going to not be able to ask a couple of the questions here, but I think that everyone is leaving feeling much better informed about your role in the community and appreciative of the great work that you're doing. I just have to put in one quick plug for MKE Urban Stables. I don't know if you're very familiar with, you know, Kent is very involved and is the chair of the board. And we have the Milwaukee Police Department horses on site now. I don't know if the Sheriff's Department is considering bringing back horses, but of course, I think we would welcome that. But we also are working very closely. We hope to work as we moved past COVID to, you know, with police and kids to really help build those relationships. And it sounds like you would have a lot to offer in that regard as well. So thank you for that. And thank you, Kent, for inviting our sheriff and for leading this conversation today. And I'm going to turn it back to President Darren.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Sheriff, for being here today. And Kent, thank you for facilitating this conversation. Just like to say how deeply appreciative we are to the both of you for your commitment to our city. Our club members know that for years we've made a donation to the Polio Eradication Initiative in honor of our speakers. Over the past decade, our club and club members have donated over $175,000 to that initiative. And while the polio initiative remains critically important, this year we're changing it up. In honor of community leaders like yourselves who speak to our club members, we will be making a donation in your name to the YWCA of Southeastern Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. A few other notes. The Coffee Connector Group, again, will be meeting virtually this Thursday morning at 7:30 a.m. See the link in this morning's email, or of course, contact the Rotary office. And tune in this Thursday for our snack program again, where Lilith Fowler, Rotarian with RCM and Executive Director of the Harbor District, will give us an overview of the work that's going on there. You can join that live on Zoom, or if you can't make it, check out our YouTube channel. Also join us next Tuesday, where we will hear from Noah Williams, Professor of Economics at UW-Madison, and he will be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the Wisconsin economy. Thank you all for joining this program today, and let's go out and seek truth together. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much.